You're listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Wyatt. Have you ever paid attention to how a turkey and wild turkey looks? And what's that thing hanging off the end of his nose? And what purpose might it serve? We're going to learn that and more today with Dr. Richard Buchholz from Ole Miss.
Mississippi Outdoors is sponsored by Entergy Mississippi. Entergy is building a stronger and cleaner grid to power a brighter future and protect our great outdoors for generations to come.
You're listening to the Mississippi Outdoors Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Wyatt. Today, talking turkey and more with Dr. Richard Buchholz from the University of Mississippi.
That's
Dr.
right.
Buchholz, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
And, you know, I have to start with my wife is an Ole Miss grad, and she was actually the homecoming queen at Ole Miss in 2000. And I called her today. She's a proud rebel. And I said, I am interviewing a professor of biology from Ole Miss who was born and raised in New York City. And she texted back, exclamation point, exclamation point. That is so interesting. You have to ask him, how does a man become a turkey expert from New York City?
Well, first of all, did the missus ever take my biology course?
I don't know if she did or not. I'm not sure.
I don't know if I'm allowed to dig that up, but I want to see what grade she got. No. I was very lucky when I was 5 years old. My parents bought this broken down house that was 2 blocks from a salt marsh.
Okay.
And in those days, people told their kids, all right, come back, when at sundown, or come back for dinner, or when your dad gets home, or whatever. And so my brother and I explored nature, right? That's what we did when we weren't in school. And so that triggered my interest in all kinds of things. But nobody in my family went to college. And so they said, you like animals, you should become a veterinarian. Mm-hmm. And luckily, along the way, I discovered that there were these people who did field ecology. But on that journey, when I thought I was going to be a veterinarian, everyone told me, well, you need experience, And I talked to our family vet, and he said, you're too young, take a number. I was like 14 at that point. And someone else said, well, you can volunteer at the Bronx Zoo. They take teenagers to volunteer at the Bronx Zoo. And I had never been to the Bronx Zoo.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
And so I scribbled a letter saying, hey, I want to come help take care of animals on the weekends. And I got a letter back from the bird curator. And she said, you have to be at least like 18 or 21 to work with mammals or reptiles because they're dangerous. But you can come work with birds. Mm. And I knew very little about birds. Turns out there are a lot of really dangerous birds, but I guess the zoo didn't know about it. And so they let teenagers go work there. There are like cranes and cassowaries and vultures. There are all kinds of things that could hurt you. Yeah. And, did that. I had to get on a bus in Queens at like 5 a.m, take this bus over the bridge to the Bronx. And in those days, the Bronx was iffy.
Yeah.
And then I'd have to walk up to this entrance to the zoo. And I got hooked because like on the first day, they said, okay, come with us. And we caught vultures, Indian vultures. And he's like, open your arm, the zookeeper. And I put a vulture under my arm, not like tied up, not its beak covered up. Its beak was sticking out that way. And he said, get in the van. He's like, just don't turn around. And you can imagine, like 14, that's totally addictive.
Yeah.
And so
sure.
I just got into birds and interested in conservation, right?
Yeah.
Because zoos were just making that real switch to not just keeping things in cages, but teaching you about them and teaching about threatened and endangered species. And so eventually went to grad school and did my master's on a bird called a curassow that lives in South America. And for my PhD, my advisor told me I needed to work on something more common, more easily studied than some threatened bird in South America. And I was interested in bird ornaments, like why are some birds dull and some have weird structures, like turkeys have naked heads and bright colors.
Yeah.
And she said, you should work on wild turkeys. And I said, I don't want to be the turkey guy. And she said, do me a favor, give it a try. And so for half a year, I studied wild turkeys and sandhill cranes in North Florida, and then eventually switched over full-time to turkeys.
And that was in your time at the University of Florida that you were just discussing.
Yeah, so that's when I started working on wild turkeys.
Okay.
And I was lucky. Near Gainesville, there's a place called Payne's Prairie Preserve where there was no hunting, and the turkeys there were reasonably tame. And unfortunately, I discovered that once you put radios on them, they actually do leave the preserve. And for some reason in the springtime, they suddenly disappear. So, yeah, I learned that the hard way.
Yeah.
But, yeah. So, yeah, it was a great experience. And I eventually did become the turkey guy.
Yeah. So I have to ask too, then to the University of Mississippi to Ole Miss, what led you there?
My first academic job was at, I think it's now called University of Louisiana Monroe.
Okay. Yeah.
But back then it was ULM.
Yeah.
And no, back then it was Northeast Louisiana.
That's right.
University,
Northeast
right?
Louisiana.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I worked there for 4 years and learned a lot about what I wanted to do and what I didn't want to do. And yeah, this perfect job opened up at Ole Miss. And so I was lucky enough to get it.
Very cool. Okay. And I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but like the picture of this turkey that's on the wall over your shoulder, Chip was telling me earlier today, and he pointed to the snoot off, the end of the nose there. And he said, there's a really interesting story. He read some research and some things, some studies that you've done, some information you've discovered about the relationship between that and the actual gut health inside of that male turkey and how that might actually relate to mating. I don't even know where to start.
Sure. So remember that what I got interested in was why turkeys have all these, what we call ornaments, right?
Yeah.
The bare head, the beard, the spurs, the way that they orient their feathers during a display, the fantail and the iridescent feathers. Back then I was really interested in color changes, and it turns out that's the one thing I haven't studied about turkey ornaments. But yeah, and so I came up with some hypotheses, and there was a hot idea at that time in sort of behavioral ecology that all of these ornaments in birds are indicators of health, and particularly things like diseases and parasites. And so when I was catching turkeys down at Payne's Prairie Preserve in Florida, and also collecting samples at hunter check stations, I was trying to see what was the correlation between the size of these ornaments and intestinal parasite load, also ectoparasites like lice and mites on their feathers, ticks. And the thing that really jumped out statistically as being strong was that even after you control for age, males with longer snoods had fewer parasites of two kinds, but mostly coccidia, which if people keep rabbits or poultry, they know coccidia is a big problem. It's an intestinal single-celled parasite that damages the intestinal lining. And especially for young animals, they can actually die from infection. For older animals, they build up an immune response, and it's probably still causing damage, or it's costly controlling it with your immune system. But you have to survive it the first time you're exposed to it. And yeah, so longer snoods had fewer coccidia, and that got me interested in the possibility that this was an indicating ornament, that females could look at males and assess their quality as a mate.
And then following that, what did you find sort of definitively?
So over time, I was able to get more funding, like from the National Science Foundation and some other agencies. And I was actually able to do some experiments where I gave young birds some coccidia, and, they don't feel great for like 2 weeks, but in captivity, they have a lot of food and water and protection. And so they end up activating their immune system, and nobody died from it, right?
Yeah, right.
And then for other wild turkey chicks kept in captivity, I gave them medication so they wouldn't get infected. And we ended up finding that, it was true. If you grow up with coccidia, you're going to grow a longer snood, even though you're going to otherwise look indistinguishable from other males.
Okay.
Right? You couldn't really tell with the human eye which males had been infected and which weren't. And we were also able to show in captivity that females are preferring males with those longer snoods.
Okay.
And the differences are small. Like we're just talking actually a few millimeters. And at Florida, I also did experiments with decoys where I set up decoys and I gave them different size snoods, right? And I had speakers playing behind them with strutting sounds. And statistically significant number of females went to the decoy with the longer snood.
Fascinating.
So, and you can actually get them to crouch to solicit mating from a decoy if you pump up their hormones a little bit. And so these females were actually trying to ask this decoy to mate with them, and they wanted the guy with the longer snood.
And as you're telling that story, I'm picturing you at that time doing that research, that particular experiment you mentioned. And I'm also juxtaposing that against the young kid yourself, the story of here you are, you move into an old house next to an abandoned marsh in New York. You're going to Bronx Zoo. Fast forward, you're getting to, for a living, decoys, female turkeys, sounds and chirping and mating sounds, on a speaker, and then collect that data. It sounded, a lot of people will say, this particular line of work or that has been, a dream come true. It seems like that really is or has been for you.
Yeah, I think at the time you're so into it, the technical details of it, and wondering if someone's going to think it's silly that you're like staying up late at night crafting snoods out of latex, right? Or cutting out. In those days, you couldn't buy decoys of a gobbler with a fan tail.
Okay.
So I had to build it out of cardboard, right?
Yeah.
Today you can get like soft decoys and they look a lot more realistic. And so I wasn't thinking about how lucky I was back there, but I certainly look back on it as such an important period of time. And in fact, to this day, at least amongst behavioral ecologists, like that's the work I'm known for.
Yeah.
The guy with the snoods.
The guy with the snoods. That's really cool. You mentioned in passing there a minute ago, hunter check station. Okay. Again, for that young man from New York City, what was that first experience like for you, encountering real hunters first time at a hunter check station? What was that like?
So I had relatives in Pennsylvania who hunted deer.
Okay.
Right? And so that's about, there's no hunting in New York City. Right. So, although I once found a dead black duck that somebody had wounded and it later died. And I returned the tag. Right?
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And so that was pretty important too. But yeah, so here I am, driving at dawn up to it was Camp Blanding, military base in North Florida. And I was driving up there and never having been to a hunter check station, never having met a turkey hunter directly, And so I'm waiting around there with, I don't remember who, it wasn't like Fish and Wildlife staff it must have been a volunteer or something.
Okay.
And so slowly, right, as you get closer to noon, these guys start coming in, and the guys are coming in who didn't get anything, and they're telling the story of the hunt. And I really appreciated, number one, how much they knew about turkeys, right? But also just the passion. And there were some guys that wouldn't let me measure their turkey, right? Which at the time, of course, I was pretty upset about. But for them, I think it was hunting the bird was an emotional experience, right? And somehow science was making the thing somehow technical. Other people were sure that I could, collect some samples from the bird, no problem. Unfortunately, some guys would bring it in already gutted, which was not very useful to me if you're looking for intestinal parasites.
Yeah.
But once I started measuring snood, they were like, hey, now wait, what's that about, right? Because it looks like a pretty weird thing to do. And today, you know, I've done other podcasts and a lot of people know about it. But at the time, it was very surprising to people, the things you would measure other than spurs and a beard.
Yeah. That's really fascinating. And I was reading too on some of the notes about something called, I think I'm saying it right, oscillated, an oscillated turkey. Is that the correct pronunciation?
Yeah. So there are only two kinds of turkey in the world, right? Our North American wild turkey that has several subspecies. We have the eastern subspecies here in Mississippi. And then the other turkey is down in the Yucatan, in 3 countries in a very small area, and that's called the oscillated. And the word oscillated refers to the eye-like shapes that are on their tail feathers.
Okay.
They're not quite like the eyes of a peacock, but they're still rounded. And so, yeah, it was called the oscillated turkey. And there was a point at which I realized we don't know anything about it, right? There were just a handful of studies on the ecology of oscillated turkeys. And so luckily, with funding from National Geographic, I was able to go down to a study site where they were not hunted. I'd learned my lesson of not putting radio tags on hunted turkeys for behavioral studies. So for 5 years, 2 grad students and I, master students, did studies of their movements. And that was our sort of first step of trying to learn some information that was not previously known.
Yeah. And they're more colorful overall, like brightly colored than the...
I would say so. Males and females look more similar to one another than our turkeys.
Okay.
They're not as sexually dimorphic. They weigh less. They're smaller.
Okay.
They have massive spurs. These spurs are really long and super sharp. You know, that happens with wild turkeys too, right? Spurs get longer as they get older, but a lot of times it's sort of not dangerous looking. But these oscillated turkeys, the first time you have to handle one, you suddenly become super careful because they have some wicked spurs.
You know, and again, you know, I was kind of reading about you. There are probably just a few people in the world who I could ask with personal experience, how do you catch an oscillated turkey?
Well, I thought it would be easy. I thought it would be just like a wild turkey, and it's not, because unless the bird has been feeding in a crop field or visiting a cattle pasture, which, you know, most of my study site was tropical rainforest. So unless they're used to eating grain, right, they won't come to a bait site for you to throw a net over them. And so it actually was a real challenge. But the first bird I caught, we were out looking, trying to find birds we could catch. And someone told me about an archaeological site, right? There are all these Mayan ruins there.
Okay.
And they said, yeah, there's a bird down at this archaeological site who has gotten used to tourists coming there. And he's been attacking people. And he some tourist guide got caught really bad in the leg. He got spurred in the leg and actually had to go, get it treated. And I said, all right, to my grad student, Edward, I said, let's go down there and check it out. And we're driving down this jungle road in some beat up rental. Most of the time, they won't let you rent stuff if they know you're going to go off road in Belize, right?
Yeah.
We found this guy with beat up rentals, and he's like, okay, sure, no problem. So we're going down this road, we're canopy of the rainforest over us, and before we even got to the archaeological site, we see something in the road, and this male is running at us.
Okay.
Yeah,
like a game of chicken between the car and the turkey.
Yeah. And it's like, wow, okay, he's going to be easy. So I get out with a net, right? With a handle, like a dip net, a fishing dip net. And I get out, and he's only a couple feet away, but he's super fast. And every time I try to put the net over him, he's just jumps back a foot.
Yeah.
But he's angry, right? He's clearly very angry. And keep in mind, I don't know much about oscillated turkeys at this point. And I'm thinking about my behavioral training, and my grad student sitting in the car so as to not spook the turkey. And the male is picking up pebbles in the road and like beating them up with his beak and then throwing them away. And there's this thing in ethology, in the study of behavior, about how when animals are in conflict, they'll often redirect their actions to some object. And it's like a signal. It's like, look how tough I am. Look what I did to this rock. I'm going to do that to you, right? But you're kind of scary, so I'm not going to do that right now. And so I just had the dumb idea of picking up rocks with my fingers and doing the same thing.
Okay.
And it set him off like that, and he jumped up to spur me. I'm sitting on the ground. He jumps up to spur me, and I see those spurs coming at me, so I grab his legs out of the air. And that was the first oscillated turkey I caught in full view of my graduate student.
Oh, wow.
And he gets out of the car and he's like, "You are a turkey god." And it was just sheer luck. Like, I could have been blinded. I could have been seriously hurt. But yeah, so that was the first bird we caught.
That is fantastic.
Other birds we caught with foot nooses and drop nets. But we actually had to train birds in the rainforest to start feeding on things like corn, because they wouldn't touch it. They'd walk it right past it. We put up cameras, trail cameras, and they would walk right past little piles of corn. We tried corn, birdseed, wheat. We picked fruits in the forest and put them down, and they would not go after it. And then over time, some of the birds, if we spread more corn over a larger area, especially if we soaked it, they would give it a try. And only then could we get birds under drop nets.
It's really fascinating.
When you were studying those oscillated turkeys, were there any like behavioral things that you learned from them that you kind of like had a realization on about the North American turkey?
Well, the realization was, of course, it's a turkey, right? It's in the same genus as our wild turkey. But behaviorally, there are a lot of things that they do are different. So I would say I was surprised by the differences of an oscillated turkey from a wild turkey, and made assumptions, especially early on, about they would be like wild turkeys when they weren't. And one of the things that they do that's really interesting, the males do, is there are some males that set up display areas. They stay there, right? They don't go like our gobblers. They don't go trying to find females. They stay at that site and display. And groups of females pass through those locations.
Wow.
And he's doing his work, displaying like crazy. Females, of course, look really uninterested. And a lot of times the females just keep going. And then the male just stays there and continues to display in his spot, waiting for some other females to show up. But if they linger, and I still remember the first time I saw this, it was just after dawn. There was like mist over the rainforest. It was so cool. And this group of females approached this male that was displaying in a road, and then they were hanging out, and he's displaying like crazy, and then he drops down to the ground on his belly, sitting there, immobile. And that's part of the display. I thought he had a stroke or something, right? Because, you never see a gobbler not do something, right? And so there's a part of their display when he doesn't move, and then the hens come and they walk around him and they look at him. Like they look him over.
Like get a close face-to-face look.
And then his tail, which is folded, starts to move real slowly side by side. And then it goes faster and faster and faster. And then all of a sudden he stands up with a fan tail, and then he goes back to strutting again.
Wow.
And I guess they find it mesmerizing because, yeah.
I always see these strange videos, the North American turkey, of them like circling around a car or a dead animal or things like that. Have you done any research on those kind of more strange or behavioral things that the North American turkey does, or have any insight on things like that?
Yeah, when those kind of videos hit the news, I usually get called by some newspapers and things trying to ask me to interpret it. I don't think there's anything magical about it. I wouldn't attribute any higher thinking to the turkeys. Like there's an example where I think it was in Massachusetts, and they said the turkeys were mourning a dead animal of some kind because they were going in a circle
Yeah, I
around
think I
it.
saw that video. Yeah.
And you know what wild turkeys and ocellated turkeys and a lot of other sort of ground birds do is right, they will examine with their head tilted using one eye, and they'll watch it. And as they walk around it, any other birds that are in their flock, right, they're used to flocking. They follow one another. And so you get this kind of, this movement around it that looks really organized, as though it's a ritual of some kind, but
It's not.
no, that doesn't happen. I've seen it in ocellated turkeys as well, where my other grad student, Thomas, actually saw a hawk kill a bird, not an ocellated turkey, but this attracted the attention of the ocellated turkeys in the area, and they ran over and they did something very similar where they sort of walked around it with their feathers sort of oriented to try to scare the hawk off.
Huh. Very interesting.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, this is kind of jumping over a little bit, but before we run out of time, the Gulf Sea Live app is something that you've been involved with. What is that? And I'm sure we have people listening that maybe haven't even heard it.
Sure.
The Gulf Sea Live app. What is that?
So although in my heart of hearts, I'm an animal behaviorist, I'm really concerned about conservation of our environment. And after the BP oil spill, my colleague Glenn Parsons and I, who was a shark biologist, were talking about what can we do to better get people involved in trying to manage our resources, right? To understand the impact of an event like that. And we came up with this idea of sort of crowdsourcing information on our Gulf Coast, right? The fact that our agencies can't do all the monitoring that needs to be done. So let's have people out there who enjoy nature, whether it's walking down the beach, right, or fishing or whatever it might be. Let's have them document what's out there. Let's accumulate that record so that we begin to learn from that crowdsourcing. And, it's basically citizen science, right? It's getting everybody involved in adding to a database. And Gulf Sea Life and gulfsealife.org is the website you can go to get the app, or you can use it directly on the internet as a web portal. And it's spelled SEE, so it's Gulf Sea Life, not ocean. So we developed that over time with funding from MDWFP, which comes from the Restore Council, which is basically oil spill penalty money. And I work with the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, and we've developed this app. It's beginning to really catch on. We've had over 3,000 downloads. There are other naturalist apps out there that can do the same thing, but they're not designed for the Gulf Coast. And we really want to appeal to the people who live on or visit the Gulf Coast in particular. And for any scientists out there, we have a citizen science platform within the app, and you can develop your own project within the app, access your own data. It's not our data, it's yours. We're trying to provide that service as well. And we even have a little bit of money to help those projects along. So yeah, if people are interested visiting the coast in any of the coastal states, Gulf Sea Life might be something you can use, and you can help us develop. We're constantly trying to improve it.
So what specific data are y'all looking for with the app?
So right now, there are certain species that we expect to be the most common species on the coast, on land or in the water.
Okay.
And so not everything is in it. And in fact, people have surprised us, like the people in Texas were like, how come the badger is not in this app? Well, we don't have badgers here. We didn't think anyone would see a badger on a beach, right? So
now, if you do, take a picture.
take a picture, right? Because we have this option as you take a picture, you upload it, you choose from the drop-down list, not on list, right?
Okay.
And we respond to that and we add things, additional species counts. The app can train you about what features to look for to identify it yourself. There's something in there called the ID wizard, and it'll ask you a series of questions, and that can help you figure out what it is. But you can also just upload it and say, I don't know what it is. And the user community then can help you identify it. What's cool about Gulf Sea Life, though, is that it's literally trying to build that community of people on the coast to interact with other people on the coast, right?
Yeah.
To stimulate knowledge, to share knowledge. And we've got some features coming up soon in time for summer in which you'll get notified of sightings near you, right? So you'll get a notification on your phone or by email if you choose that'll say, hey, we know you're interested in manatees, right? This other user saw a manatee 10 miles away from you.
Now that's cool.
Yeah. So we're excited about that, rolling out that new feature.
Yeah, that's cool. Time frame on that?
We're beta testing now, so probably June 1. If you already have Gulf Sea Life, you'll need to update to the latest feature to have that on there.
Yeah.
And we want to help people, right? This is not research per se. It's building for the future. So the data's out there for effective management, effective response. And the app, you can also, if you see something you're concerned about, if you see some dead birds and you're worried it might be bird flu, if you see a mammal that's injured and you're wondering who to call, the app has notification features where you can go in and find the right person to contact for the place you are to get some help.
Very cool. Fascinating stuff, Dr. Buchholz, and really do appreciate some of your time here on the show. Thanks for being here. And I hope we get to do this again and kind of pick your brain more on turkey and all things in between.
Great. I'd be glad to do it, but I'll be checking. You need to download Gulf Sea Life.
All right.
We'll
download it. Chip's going to download it, and we're going to look for those notifications and the update. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Told you, turkey and all things in between on today's show. Hope you enjoyed that. We'll see you outdoors.